Hello and welcome to this Australia-New Zealand Women's Declaration International webinar for July 2024. My name is Janet Fraser, coming to you from Gundungurra Nurra, west of Sydney. I'm the convener of the Feminist Legal Clinic in Exile. Tonight I have Bronwyn Williams from Feminist Legal Clinic doing tech with me. Wherever you're coming from this evening, we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, but particularly the women of this continent. We have 4 speakers tonight whom I'll introduce in turn. A reminder that the presentation is recorded and question time is not. When we end for question time, I'd appreciate it if women used the Q&A box for written questions so I don't lose them in the chat. If you wish to speak, please use the raise your hand icon and I'll keep a running list of the order in which I see you appear. And now to introduce our excellent panel. The Affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances, AAWAA, is the national body representing women's liberation groups from 7 of the 8 states and territories in Australia. AAWAA is secular, independent, and unaligned with any political party. We advocate for women and girls, especially in domains where we face discrimination or vulnerability because of our sex. Leah Whiston and Sue Clarke formed the Queensland group Women Up Queensland in 2023. Since forming Women Up Queensland, they have started their own YouTube channel, Women Up Queensland, and hold monthly speakers' corners in the Brisbane CBD. In the past 3 months, the trans activists have become more aggressive in trying to shut down these monthly meetings, where women and men come along to speak about how gender ideology is impacting on them and the deterioration of women's rights. Last Sunday, the trans activists stormed the event while Leah was speaking, and what resulted was a barrage of aggression and abuse by about 40 trans activists. The Honourable Dr. Jocelynne A. Scutt is a barrister and human rights lawyer admitted to practice in all Australian states and territories and called to the Bar of England and Wales in 2014. She is one of Australia's leading human rights barristers, was instrumental in reform of the laws on rape and domestic violence, and has served as Anti-Discrimination Commissioner of Tasmania and as a judge on the High Court of Fiji. She is a member of the UN Committee Against Trafficking, a board member of the International Alliance of Women, and its representative to the Coalition for the International Criminal Court. Jocelynne was appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia in 1996 for service to feminist jurisprudence and issues affecting women, including the establishment of a publishing company encouraging female contributions. She was inducted into the Victorian Honour Roll of Women in 2001. An academic, writer and filmmaker, her latest book is Wage Rage for Equal Pay, Australia's Long, Long Struggle, which was published this year. And Beauty, Women's Bodies and the Law, Performances in Plastic was published in 2020. And there were many, many, many books published prior to that. An edited collection, Women, Power and Autonomy, Rights, Respect and Representation in Law and Society, is due out next. And she is working with filmmaker Karen Buczynski-Lee on a film about Mary Shelley, Frankenstein and The Last Man. Tonight, she will be speaking on visibility, invisibility and reclamation, Adela Pankhurst, Jennie Baines and Alice Suter in the Australian High Court. So, welcome, esteemed panel. And now I'd like to turn it over to Karen from AAWAA. Karen.
Thank you, Janet, for having us along to speak at the webinar this evening. And thank you for allowing us to share this floor with our esteemed sisters and women's organisations as well. We are AAWAA, the Affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. Our motto is Together Getting It Done. And we have a number of groups. For those of you who don't know us, I can see some of our AAWAA sisters here already as attendees, so welcome to them as well. I'd just like to describe a little bit about who we are and then give you an update on some of our activities recently and just finish up with some information about a summit that we will be holding in Canberra in October. So we are the Affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. We have 7 groups now. We have WAC, the Women's Action Alliance Canberra, which is now incorporated. We became incorporated in May this year. That was a big step for us and for AAWAA. We have WAT in Tasmania. We have the Queensland Women's Action Alliance in Queensland. We've got Western Australia, South Australia covered, Victoria covered. And New South Wales has just joined us with the New South Wales Women's Action Alliance, which we pronounce as NOIR, with a silent S, obviously, but that's NOIR, New South Wales Women's Action Alliance, just came on board about 3 weeks ago, so that's terrific. We're still waiting for Northern Territory before we've got the full set, so if there's any sisters in the Northern Territory who want to start up a Women's Action Alliance, please get in touch. Who are we and what do we do? We've got these local groups. Each group does have a local focus. We aim for good standing in the community. It's important to us to use fact and evidence, reason and rationality to make our case. And we make those cases in submissions and letters through our terrific writing team, who also use courtesy and reasonableness to represent us. Our main strategy is to point out, I suppose, where current or established frameworks that are already set up and obligations that are set up and designed to protect women and girls, where those are being eroded, and engage those with responsibility for protecting those frameworks. So that's our main approach. As Janet has already said, we're not aligned with the left or the right or any particular religious perspective or belief system. We do spend a lot of time working on submissions and letters. Some of the things we've been up to recently, I'll give you an update from our last update earlier in the year. We have submitted to the Australian Senate on their menopause inquiry that came from AAWAA National. We've also made a submission to the Department of Infrastructure and everything else. It's a very big department, lots of things in it, for their review of the Online Safety Act. The Australian Building Codes Board has recently recently asked for submissions on their review of all gender sanitary facilities. So that one was fun to write. Also, the AHRC, their mapping project, interestingly named, their mapping project on current and emerging threats to transgender and gender diverse people. We also do some letter writing, not just submissions. We've recently written a letter of support to Bill Shorten about his desire, at least at the moment, to remove so-called prostitution services from the NDIS. We don't just do national stuff, we also do international stuff. We've submitted to the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, Reem Al-Salem, for her request for submissions on violence in sport. Did that earlier in the year. We've also written to Australian ambassadors in Geneva in support of Reem Al-Salem's prostitution report that also came from AAWAA National. Other things we do are FOIs. So we put in freedom of information requests. We've always got a few on the go. A couple of recent ones to DOHAC, Department of Health and Aged Care. Just trying to get some records on the advice that experts have given about the guidelines and protocols for the treatments of gender dysphoria. We've got over 300 pages back on that one, I think. If anyone wants to have a look, let us know, or we can point you to the disclosure log. We've also asked and gotten stuff back, not much on this one, on how the LGBTQIA+ health and wellbeing expert advisory group to the government was formed. Not much information, as I say, came back on that one. We also have been working at the state and territory level. Our Western Australian sisters have written a letter to Reem Al-Salem just alerting her about the sex self-ID bill that's going through the WA Parliament. And we also use the UN special procedures periodically, which is to alert special rapporteurs to failures of process, shall we say, that are going on around things like this sex self-ID bill, and also the New South Wales Equality Bill. I'll talk about that just briefly in a second as well. We've also submitted to the South Australian Parliament on the potential for a South Australian Human Rights Act. We have QA doing fabulous local action blog posts for us. So you can see we've got lots of things covered off here. That's our Queensland group. And yes, New South Wales Parliament, we've put in a UN Special Procedures request there about the lack of public consultation on the New South Wales Equality/Atrocity Bill, also known as the Greenwich Bill. Currently, we're working on a submission to the New South Wales Parliament on the Surrogacy Act and the Status of Children Act. That's due end of next week, I think. And the Women's Action Alliance Canberra has written to Belco Arts, a local community arts centre, who had a drag act for NAIDOC Week, a family-friendly event. So here's a bit of show and tell for you, sisters. A few pictures for you. If you don't want to see a drag act, please turn away now. But we wrote to the Belco Arts Centre and said, hey, you know, you've got this drag act in there, you call it family friendly, no one was alerted to it. We got back the expected reply, which was nothing to see here, move on, bees. Yeah, but they thought that this chap was okay to be performing to children at the event, inspiring children to be themselves. So yeah, anyway, we will eventually follow up on that in our own way. Some of you will know what that is, how that looks. We've also got some coalition submissions that we've been working on with our coalition partners, Australian Feminists for Women's Rights, COAL, LGBT Alliance, and WRNA. They've also been at the international, excuse me, or UN level around the WHO's TGD health guidelines. We've written to the Guidelines Development Group and to the Guidelines Review Committee, saying to the latter, saying that your Guidelines Development Group isn't actually following the guidelines of the GRC. We also have followed up on that. We've also written a letter of concern to CEDAW. Some of these we don't advertise because we do think it's important to give people time to respond. So we don't just publish everything that we do on our website. But we've written to the CEDAW committee a letter of concern, and we've sent that letter to all members. We've had some responses. Daphne Hacker said, thank you for this important work, or words to that effect. So I don't know if that's a good sign. I hope so. They are that's the written work that we do. We also do, being action alliances, we also actually do actions. This was our International Women's Day action. We had one in the morning over traffic in Canberra. This is the Canberra group. And again, the same Canberra group in the afternoon. Lots of positive honks. The Canberra group keeps a track of positive and negative reactions. So positive reactions are thumbs up and waves and honks and things like that. Negative reactions are, people flipping the bird. Also, just more from the Canberra group, a sports protest near some sporting fields, and this one is, yes, a schools protest, get gender out of schools. Our Queensland sisters are also active in the action space, like getting out there with placards. Here they are, getting ready for some action in Pimlico. They were going to attend the community cabinet, I understand, with their terrific placards. I mean, look at this, it's brilliant. So there they are in action, painting their signs. They were going to attend the Pimlico community cabinet, but there were, a lot of police and with people with walkie-talkies around, which kind of provided a bit of an intimidating environment, I think, for them. So they decided instead to go to their usual spots, which are outside local MP offices, and get some happy snaps there. Also, they head out to intersections and get lots of good responses there at intersections and on main roads, with lots of exposure as well for their signs. I'll finish up with a mention of the AAWAA Women's Summit 2024 to be held in Canberra in October, the first weekend in October, first Friday and Saturday in October. email us to register. We're still developing our program. Here's a bit of a sense of what it's looking like at the moment. It's still in draft form, so hey, you know, you get an early look. But we're trying to get a balance between some bigger picture ideas as well as some practical stuff. We will have some group work as well as some orienting sessions with ideas and concepts. So here we've got just a description of how AAWAA works, what our strategy, what our model is, feminist visions of women's liberation. We've got practical activism, also some tips there. That'll be an excellent session with women on the ground who do this stuff all the time, providing some advice. We've also got a session on how to write submissions and sharing our experience in doing that, how to manage things for tone. We will have an AAWAA members only planning meeting one afternoon, but then also back to everyone who attends, all attendees, to applying what we've learned. So that's our AAWAA Women's Summit 2024, $60 a day, $30 concession. Do get in touch if you want to register. We will email you back with some further details. That's us. Thank you so much again for having us. We are AAWAA, the Affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. Together, we're getting it done. And as always, thank you so much to Women's Declaration International Australia, New Zealand for having us on to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. That's marvellous. Always marvellous to get updates, and a conference sounds really exciting. Thank you so much. Karen, thank you. And now I would like to introduce Leah Whiston and Sue Clarke from UP Queensland. You have the floor, women.
I guess I could start because before the event, there were quite a number of things that went on with the police. Do you want me to go through that, Leah?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so we went through Brisbane City Council to get what's called a notice of intention to have our event at a different location to prove that the trans crazies were harassing us. So we secured that, but the Monday, so that was in late June, but the Monday, what was it, the 16th of July, which was the July event was the 21st of July. I got a phone call from the police to say that the trans, as they call them, pride activists, also lodged a notice of intention for the same location, same day and same time. So that meant that we would have to share the entire area with them. So that meant they could get up in our face because they had approval, basically, to harass us, which I wasn't very happy about. I guess none of us in Woman Up was very happy about that. So we had to accept that. Then on the Wednesday, I got a call from the police again to say that the location that we secured, which was Redcliffe Place, was now another group. They gave it to another group. So that meant we didn't have a location. But they said that Queen's Garden Park, where we ended up, was available to us if we wanted that because we had an approved notice of intention. So we took that, but then they said, oh, we're going to have to tell your friends that you're going there. So they've got the option of going to Queen's Gardens Park. And once again, I said to this other officer, that just means they're going to get in our face. But on the Tuesday...
Can we just emphasise that point, that they know what these people are like against us? Yeah. We'd swapped locations and they said, we're going to tell the people who are harassing you, the men who want to come and be violent and aggressive to you, we're going to tell them exactly where you are.
Yeah.
Sorry, it
blows your mind.
Unbelievable to me. Yeah.
Tuesday, before I got that Wednesday, I actually sent an urgent email to the Minister of Police saying, can you stop this? You know, it's going to be potential harm towards us. This ridiculous thing that multiple groups can lodge a notice of intention at the same time and all be granted the same area. And I actually said, would you do this if an Israeli group was at this location? Would you approve Free Palestine to come in and give them full reign to just full out aggression? Didn't get a response. So on the Thursday, because of what I was told on the Wednesday, I thought I'm going to ring Brisbane City Council because I wanted to know what in the legislation allowed for multiple groups, multiple locations, same time, same day. And so I rang the Brisbane City Council, and it's called the Notice of Intention team, and spoke to the guy there. And I just said, what is it in the legislation that allows you to do that? And he goes, we never book multiple groups in the same location. He said, we just don't do that. I said, well, why would the police ring me and tell me that you had approved a notice of intention for the trans activists? And he said, I don't know. I don't know why they did that. So then, of course, that raised alarm bells for us that someone in the major events team was feeding the information to the trans activists. So I rang the policewoman I didn't actually ring her. I wanted to speak to someone else because we didn't have a very good conversation on the Monday. But the guy that I wanted to speak to was available, but they decided to put me through to her. And I just said, I just got off the phone from Brisbane City Council, and they said that they never approved the notice of intention for the trans activists. And then she went off the phone. I thought she was going to check their paperwork, but she didn't. She came back on the phone. She said, well, you never had approval either. And I said, well, we did. I've got evidence of that. And also when I spoke to the guy at Brisbane City Council, he said, you lodged your notice of intention first. That was accepted. They lodged their notice of intention after us, so therefore it was rejected. But she was argumentative and then said basically Brisbane City Council don't know what they're doing. So I just said to her, because she told me that she had put forward a change to the legislation to stop this from happening, and it had been knocked back by government multiple occasions. And I was just talking to her about the legislation, and she said, I'm not going to argue the legislation with you. And I said, I'm not arguing. I just want to know why we are unsafe because of this loophole in the legislation. And then all of a sudden, it was a normal conversation. She raised her voice and said, I'm not going to tolerate you yelling abuse down the phone at me. And I just said, are you kidding me? What abuse? I've not raised my voice. So then I knew to the people around her in that area, she wanted to make out that I was yelling abuse at her down the phone. And I said, is this phone being recorded? And she said, no. And I just thought, oh, my God, I can't believe this. And anyway, she did say we would have police in attendance on the Sunday, because on Monday she said, we're not the protest police, and business as usual get priority over coming to a protest. And I thought, isn't that business as usual to protect the public? So I had a feeling something was going to go wrong. She was quite angry with me for finding out that it wasn't approved, or she appeared to be. And then so we got to Queen's Park at 11:30, an hour before the event, because in June the trans activists got there and they took our spot, even though they didn't have a notice of intention. And so it was an unauthorised gathering on their part, but they took our spot, and the police went over to them and asked them to move, and they'd said no. But we got there early to secure the spot. And when we were there, we were quite surprised as time went on. There were no trans activists, no police, which was unusual. And then we saw what looked like trans activists coming down to the park. And one of our people said as they walked past Redcliffe Place, the trans activists were there. So they hadn't been told that we went to Queen's Park for some reason, but they sent their scouts out to find us. So we knew that they were going to come. And then because there was no police presence around 12:20, myself and one of our group, we went down to Brisbane headquarters, which is a couple of streets away. And there was a plainclothes guy behind reception, and I just said, our event is about to start. We've been promised police presence, and there's no one there. And then a police officer at the end of reception said, "Oh, what's the name of your group?" And I said, Women Up Queensland. He said, "Well, there have been allocated police, but they're out doing other things. They'll turn up when they get a chance to turn up." And I said, "We're at risk of harm." And he said in a conceited manner, "All Queenslanders are at risk." So then David and I walked back to the park, and I saw, because the trans activists have their legal observers, which is ridiculous because they're the ones that break the law. And so went into the park and we got set up, and then Leah got up and spoke. And Leah, I'll leave that to you now because this is where you come in.
Well, it just went as planned, didn't it? But the thing that I didn't expect was the direction that they came from. So they actually approached us from behind. And, you know, it's done for a reason. It's done for maximum intimidation, because coming from behind, obviously, it's going to be more. I mean, I don't particularly find them scary, but at the end of the day, these are 6 foot odd, tall, burly blokes that could probably knock you out with a punch. So, yeah, they came, they conquered, they took our space. It was absolutely symbolic of what these men do, which is just override a woman's personal boundaries without a care. With their flags, and the police did absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. At one point, when I noticed that the police were there, I walked up to them, and the police actually started walking away from me.
There were actually wasn't there, where the previous month we had about 10. So they under-resourced police. So it did appear that this was punishment for finding out that the NOI wasn't approved. So for only 2, and then back to you, Leah.
Well, I just read Teresa's comment. They don't give a rat's ass about women. They don't. I've been in before to the police after I was accosted by an infamous transvestite in Brisbane, and they literally told me to come back with a physical injury. So that was when I really started to see that there was something going wrong with the police here. Obviously, it's been going wrong for years, but it was just my experience when I found it, when I was pregnant and accosted by this transvestite in public. So as we were talking to our friend Kaylee, who was a police officer for 20 years, the trans activists, we expect them to turn up and be aggressive. We do. I mean, unfortunately, that is what they're going to do. What I didn't expect was the level of compliance to their side from the police. They wouldn't even look at me. They would just look straight through me when I was asking for help. And I just found it completely, other than dystopian, just absolutely depressing.
The one surprising thing was because they were making so much noise, they were very threatening. And then, Leah, when you went up to that police officer and he said, "Oh, they've got an NOI, they're allowed to speak." They weren't speaking.
Well, that's their right to be there, he said.
But he did speaking too. It wasn't speaking. They weren't speaking. They were intimidating. The noise the level of noise.
They were calling us fucking cunts and bigots. Sorry for swearing, but that's what they do. And I just can't believe that this is allowed to happen in a public place. Why aren't women allowed? Why aren't women permitted a peaceful assembly, which is what literally the paperwork that we applied for, which was a public assembly? Why aren't women allowed that? There's something very, very deep happening that is just infiltrating all institutions, but the one I find the most scary is how the police have been captured by this. It was just
quite pathetic, wasn't it, when they were in the face of the police, and to see them cower to these men, like they there was nothing that the trans activists could do. The trans
you've got
tragics.
the main guy who was hitting a police officer with his flag, and you've got the police officer saying, okay, that's enough. Come on, you're being really aggressive. Just stop it now. And this is all recorded. You've assaulted me. You've assaulted a police officer. And then him bragging about assaulting a police officer and the man just trying to calm the bloke down. And, you know, if roles were reversed and it was one of us doing that, I mean, we'd still be in a cell now.
We would, yeah.
So yeah, so that's what we say. Like, we are just a group of normal people who have seen what's going on. We can't unsee it now. That's why we get out there and do it.
Yeah.
Because what option do we have? If we're able to do it, which I am, I mean, what's our alternative? I can't allow that. I can't allow my daughter to be growing up in a world where men have this kind of power over her spaces, where men have power over her boundaries. Yeah, it makes me want to cry just thinking about it. But
and that blue head guy, when he was assaulting the police officer and he pulled him up and he goes, well, you're going to charge me? And the police officer goes, no. And you think, my God, police are being abused and they're cowering like these people have got so much power. And that's the scary part. They fear no one. They're really unpredictable. And it was just unbelievable to see that these trans crazies have so much power over the police. And you just think, where's this going to end? How's it going to end? But we did persevere. Not everyone got to speak. And
well, no, hardly anyone got to speak. There was still a few men who wanted to speak, who I know, the couple of the men that do speak every week, that they didn't speak, and we didn't have to have a choice. We had to wrap it up, but we had to wrap it up in a way that made it look like we'd finished, because we couldn't, I mean, I couldn't bear the thought of just going. So we did what we could, didn't we?
And Leah, you approached the police and said, what are you going to do about it? And then they said, well, we had to move somewhere else. And Leah said, why aren't you moving them? And the senior police officer goes, well, they've got that spot now.
Well, they're there now. And I just thought that sums the whole thing up, doesn't it? Well, they're there now. Well, men are in our spaces now. Well, they're in our changing rooms now. Oh, they're in our toilets now.
They're there, so, yeah. But also they said when we went into the new part of the park, which wasn't far from there, but far enough away from them so we could hold our event, and they said they would hold the line. And within, 60 seconds, they'd broken that line. And then there were police everywhere. Like it was just such mayhem. It was unbelievable. But it sent home a message to the trans activists that they can do exactly whatever they want. They can push women out. We had to make sure that our equipment didn't get damaged. And the things that they called us was just disgraceful. And I said to one of the police officers, I said, have you read the Peaceful Assemblies Act? And I don't know if he was being sarcastic when he said no. And I thought, how could you not when you're doing this job? And then I said, it's about maintaining public order and public safety. And I said, that's not public order. But it was like talking to a brick wall. The priority.
It was like talking to other cult members, talking to the police. Yeah, it was all very odd. You know, it was all very odd. It was like being surrounded by overgrown toddlers.
I reckon the police were told not to do anything to the trans activists, because like there's this footage also, Leah, you put it up in a separate clip where the police, I think there's 6 police in a line, and that blue head nut goes up to each one of them. He puts his hand over his mouth, and I tried to hear what he was saying on the footage, and I'm not sure, like a fascist piece of shit I could hear with a policewoman. And then he went to a male officer and a dog. So I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if he was calling them that or he's telling them to do their job in moving with the fascist piece of shit and dogs. I couldn't work that out, but the police just stood there, and it was just, it's embarrassing for those police officers. The footage that captures this, it's just so embarrassing for the Queensland Police Force. But but on Thursday, I did get a call from a senior sergeant.
Sue gets a phone call and her heart sinks, wondering what they're going to say. But let's end on a positive note, and let's end on what they said to you.
Yeah, so they wanted to know, this senior sergeant wanted to know how everyone was after Sunday, spoke to me about the event, promised an increased police presence at our next event, which is the 25th of August, and undertaking that if the trans activists ever behave like that again, they'll take action. She said that she was also responding on behalf of the police minister. So I think he must have, because we warned him, we warned the police officer in headquarters what was going to happen, that probably egg on face, basically, left us vulnerable, and they did nothing. But it was a very positive call on the Thursday from this police officer. And I did follow it up with an email telling, explaining my experience with a couple of, well, no, it was just one person in major events, and how she lied but when she sort of raised her voice and said that I was yelling abuse down the phone. Hopefully they'll check that phone recording. But the thing is, the police may give us this undertaking, but Labor could step in and stop any undertaking they've given us. And we know Labor is 100% pro-trans. So we just have to wait and see at the next event.
We have to wait and see at the next event, and we have to take them on their word and accept that there's going to be more. But this goes so deep that it's going to take years and years to unravel. You know, this is just, I don't even know how to put it in words, how scary this is.
Because they really believe they are untouchable. The way police were treated, the way we were treated was bad enough, but the complete disrespect for the police, it was like they were just cowering to these activists. Must have been seething deep down, the police, because they wouldn't have.
I don't know if they were, if they just wanted to get the job done and go. To me, it seemed like. But our next one is on 25th of August. So anybody around, come down. You don't have to speak, just come and support and just be with us.
And we're not giving out the location until probably the Wednesday before we're the 25th, because we don't want them, even though the Brisbane City Council said that they will not give multiple groups the same area, just to prevent them from, whoever else will step in and say, okay, you can legally be there. And if they can legally be there, then it's a green light to abuse us. And that's exactly what it was. But pretty strange though, wasn't it, Leah, when there were no trans activists in the park and we saw the Scouts come into the park, and that man that came up and spoke to David and said, is this where the anti-turf protest is?
And he said, what's a turf? And this guy said, trans, I don't know. He didn't even know what he was there for. And then when it was full force, he was going for it with the rest of them. You know, you give misogynists an excuse to come and shout at women, they're going to take it with both hands.
Yeah, that's right. But the thing is, I guess people in the park, because it's a popular park and it's where Treasury Casino has their accommodation. So it was just out the front of there, because the entrance is on the park. So, you know, we all know that when they carry on like that, they're actually piquing the public, but they think that they've got the full support of the public. But there were also two young men walking through the park and saw what was going on. And they came over and that bluehead guy, they tried to rip his flag out of his hand, and then they turned around and blamed us for that. This is what you do because you come out in the park and you speak about this issue. This is what you do. So they believe that we are the ones that are, and, you know, they always talk about violence, that, you know, but what violence? Because if there was any violence towards trans people, the media would be full of it because the media loves them. And you don't hear about anything. So, yeah, but anyway, it was interesting to say the least.
Well, it's a shame that the shine was taken off of the actual speaking event of women, but this stuff has to be highlighted and people have to see what we're up against in Queensland. I mean, I don't think the people, my friends back home in the UK, really know how bad it is.
Yeah. So, but with the last 2 months, like May and June, the police were really good, really supportive. And there was such a difference in the attitude of the police, because even in the one in June, the head police, the sergeant or whatever, he said that, you know, they were looking at using powers that they don't often use. So this event in July, and I can only put it down to this policewoman I spoke into major events, and she's got an enormous conflict of interest. And, you know, you hear about the corruption with the police, but when I was talking to her and she made out that I was yelling abuse down the phone, it really shocked me. I just couldn't believe someone could do that. A police officer would do that.
No, I just read Teresa's comment saying only women officers will help us. But the women were not helping at all. There was a woman there and she honestly looked like she didn't want anything to do with me. Like I was bugging her by asking for help. It was very strange.
Yeah. And I was dealing with a policewoman, and I actually said to this person that rang us in an email, I said, I believe she's got a conflict of interest. So, because what I was told, the other person that I was dealing with, and Leah, you've dealt with people in that area, but this guy, this police officer said, I'm moving on, you'll be dealing with such and such from now. And I'm thinking, she's corrupt, she's got a conflict of interest. How the hell can we work this out with someone that is going to, you know, do the wrong thing by us, that they don't care, that they put us in the position of being so vulnerable? And there were two, like we had Kaylee got knocked to the ground, and we've got another woman in our big, an important part of our team who got hit in the head. So, and that was because the police didn't hold the line, not with Kaylee, but with, I won't give her name, but yeah, she got hit in the head, and because the police didn't hold the line, they were scattered everywhere. So this bluehead guy was just running rampant right beside us, and he hit this person in the head. It was quite a hard hit too. So it's on the footage. What will they do to us? Will it take someone getting severely injured or even killed before, you know, the government and other authorities start to see that these people are insane?
Well, even then it would probably be recorded as a woman-on-woman crime. So I doubt that would even help. That's
true. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, we've got our next event on the 25th of August, which will be interesting, and hopefully the police will increase numbers. And yeah, but we don't think it's going to stop the trans nutters anyway, because, you know, they completely disrespect the police. So they'll continue to do what they do.
That's okay. Even if there's 1,000 of them, if the police hold the line, and we can have our event, and women who have prepared time and effort into writing something to say can actually get the chance to say it, that would be really marvelous. So we'll aim for that.
Yeah. So it was quite an experience. I had a gut feeling that it wasn't going to be good on the Friday, But I really expect the police to be so cowardly. That came as a big surprise, that they just stood there and watched and said they've got a right to speak when they're yelling and abusing us. A right to speak. That wasn't speaking, and it wasn't public order, and they were a threat to public safety. So, yeah. And we've had about 23,000 views of the footage now. It's not a lot in the scheme of things, but hopefully it's piqued a few people that have seen it.
Yeah,
to show.
and a few people that might come down to the next one as well.
Yeah, we've had a few people saying that they'd like to come along, maybe not be in around us, but to sit back and watch what goes down. Yeah, so that's our story from Sunday. Almost a week.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for having us on.
No worries. Thank you very, very much, Leah, Whiston and Sue Clarke from Women Up Queensland. I completely agree with you that I don't know how we get the genie back in the bottle after this. I really don't. How do you enforce boundaries, right? Just normal boundaries that we used to have. Anyway.
Yeah, because this is overtaking
problem.
schools. So children,
yeah, that's right.
young children are being told to deny what they're seeing with their eyes. They're being told that they can, obviously they're being told they can change sex. They're being told, how do you put that genie back in the bottle? I mean, it's going to be a generation. It's going to take generations, surely.
I hope not. I suspect that for some of them, once they actually become sexually active, they'll be like, oh, it does matter. Because I think quite a lot of activists, they're not actually, well, they're not engaging in normal adult intimacies a lot, which is why they have so much time on their hands. Anyway, thank you so much. And now I would like to give the floor to the fabulous Jocelynne Scutt. Jocelynne, please.
Thank you. It seems like somewhat of an anticlimax after hearing all that horror. I mean, all sympathy, and it is worse in Australia than anywhere else. That's true. Well, I'd like to commence my anticlimactic presentation by beginning with serendipity. And the wonderful thing about doing research is what you come across by chance. And I was doing a case and just happened to pick up a volume of the Commonwealth Law Reports. And flipping through it, I came across the name Pankhurst. Well, if one comes across the name Pankhurst anywhere, we all know who it must be associated with. And when it's in the Commonwealth Law Reports, it has to be Adela. And so reading this volume, when I should have been doing something else, there were actually two cases. It's 1919, when Adela Pankhurst was arrested and prosecuted and eventually appealed to the High Court of Australia. And it's really interesting to go back into history to look at what actually happened in those two cases, because it's about the invisibility of women. And unfortunately, sometimes we women contribute to that invisibility. It's a bit like some of the chat saying that if there are women who effectively collude in covering up what's happening to women, then we're in a real problem. And the difficulty with this area of history is that women do it without realising what they're doing. So I'd just actually like to go to this presentation, which is, it is coming on, that's good, and talk about this issue of invisibility. Visibility and invisibility, and the reclamation. What happened in these two cases is that the women were demonstrating in Melbourne over the issue of wheat being exported overseas during the war. And because the bread was being exported overseas to the soldiers, to feed the soldiers, not ours, to feed the soldiers from the United Kingdom, it meant that the cost of bread was rising in Australia and ordinary people could not buy it. and thus the women were demonstrating in the park next door to Parliament House. And there are two cases that came up. One of them was Pankhurst and Porter. And this case raises the issue of whether judges are neutral or whether there's prejudice that operates within the criminal justice system. And the second one, Pankhurst and Kiernan, raises the issue of being hidden from history as well as being hidden from herstory and why that happens. If we're hidden from history, it happens because we are simply obliterated. And if we're hidden from herstory, it's because women are not aware of the realities that go on in terms of how the system operates. And what, of course, we need to do is to take a stand on this. Anyway, I'll come to the point of what happened in Pankhurst and Porter. It was shortly after 3 o'clock, and the three accused, it was Adela Pankhurst, Jennie Baines, and Alice Suter, who were the ones who were arrested. And they were demonstrating in Treasury Gardens to about 5,000 and 6,000 people who were there at the time. Adela Pankhurst got up on a seat and addressed the people who were there. This is a direct quotation from the case, and told them to follow her to Parliament House, defying the police and to break into Parliament House if it was necessary, and to see what Billy Hughes, who was the Prime Minister at the time, was going to do to get cheaper food for the starving people. Now, after she stood up on the seat, Mary Pankhurst also got up on the seat, but she was pushed off it. Pankhurst was pushed off it, and then Alice Suter got up on the seat, and she started to address the people. Alice Suter was 18 years at the time, and then she was pushed off, and Jennie Baines got up, and she was pushed off, and that was when they started to march towards Parliament House to demand that Billy Hughes, who was the Prime Minister at the time, do something about this, about the bread and about the fact that the prices were going up. And the prosecution was taken under the defence power, the Commonwealth defence power. Because of the war, and because there was war at that time, it meant that the government, the federal government, had extra powers in order to police public order, in order to ensure that goods and soldiers could run about on the railway lines, because the railway lines were state run. But at that time, under the Constitution, the federal government could take over. And what this legislation said was, it shall not be lawful for any number of persons exceeding 20 to meet in the open air in any part of the proclaimed place for an unlawful purpose, or for the purpose or on the pretext of making known their grievances, or of discussing public affairs, or considering or presenting or preparing any petition, etc. And what the case ran on was this phrase, on the pretext of making known their grievances. And they were arrested because it was alleged that they were there demonstrating and they were pretending to be there to talk about the bread and the cost of bread. Rather, they were there for some ulterior motive. We don't know what the ulterior motive was alleged to be. And this raises the issue of the power not to discriminate. We talk often about the power to discriminate, but we don't really talk about the power not to discriminate. And that's actually what's arising in the Queensland situation. The police have the power not to discriminate against the women, but they're actually choosing to do the opposite. And when we look at this legislation, when it came up to the High Court, the women had been prosecuted and convicted, and therefore they were appealing. The High Court looked at this expression for any unlawful purpose, and it clearly means for any unlawful object, being the real object. So this idea that they were there for some ulterior motive. even though it wasn't clear what they were there for, other than to demonstrate about the price of bread. And so here it says, the High Court says, is the suggestion that they are there with the ulterior motive of breaking the law or gaining notoriety? So what they're saying, it's like this issue about women being incredible. We aren't taken as credible in terms of what we say in evidence in courts. If a woman is raped, for example, if a woman has been sexually abused, raped, exploited as a child, and then when she's older brings a claim to the police, too often she's not believed. So it goes to the credibility. What they're saying is that when these women were up on the seat demonstrating and saying, we're here to say that Billy Hughes should do something about the cost of bread, the implication is they're just there to show off. They're there to make an exhibition of themselves. They're there deliberately to break the law. They're there to gain notoriety for themselves. And the High Court said that you can't simply assert that. You have to look at what actually is happening here, and might is not right. That is, the implication that was put forward by the magistrate and then the county court when they were arrested and prosecuted was that they were there, as I said, for some ulterior motive. And so the High Court looked at that issue. Are they there for an ulterior motive? Now, just to come to the second case, Adela Pankhurst was fined she was fined because she went out and contended that people, or asked people to throw rocks through the windows of the shops in Footscray. And in both these cases, the High Court had to determine whether the convictions were right. The point here is that when these two cases went to the High Court and when the High Court had dealt with them, they actually saw through the sham. So you've got High Court judges, all of whom are men, who are saying these women have been wrongly convicted. Now, when this case is actually reported by feminist historians, it's been reported in the Dictionary of Biography, for example, it's reported that they escaped on a technicality. They didn't escape on a technicality at all. They escaped on a substantive ground, namely that they had been wrongly convicted because the legislation had been interpreted wrongly, and subtext, it had been interpreted in a misogynist way to say what these women are standing up on that chair to say is not legitimate, and they're actually not legitimate operators in the political space. The second point about this case in its reporting by feminists is that they, in this Dictionary of Biography and in one other report that I found, they say it was Adela Pankhurst, Jennie Baines and one other. And Alice Suter is being written out of history by feminist historians. And when I've written about this, I wrote about it in the Women's History Network blog, the granddaughter of Alice Suter got in touch with me and she said, Alice Suter is my grandmother, my mother's mother. And they knew nothing about the history of Alice Suter at all. Their grandmother, Alice Suter, had also concealed from them this activist part she had, not, I think, because she felt ashamed of it. I'm sure she didn't, but perhaps it was because she believed it would not be seen as interesting. Now, as I said, she was 18 when she stood up on this park bench and spoke out. She was 35 when she got married. We therefore have to think, what did she do between 18 and 35? We know that if she got married at 35, she must actually have been activist in some way. And I would contend that there must be a lot of history that associates with Alice Suter that has never actually been written up, and a lot of activism. And I think that it's really important to bring attention to this case, because it is women historians who have written her out of history. And if we look at the reason that we know that she was there, it's because of patriarchal recording. It's in the Commonwealth Law Reports. It's actually in the press reports at the time. And therefore, I think we need to be really careful when we're looking at the way that we analyse what goes on in terms of our culture and our society and the recording of what women do. Because, as I've said, it's the official recording, it's the patriarchal recording that actually acknowledges that Alice Suter lived. If there wasn't the patriarchal recording in the Commonwealth Law Reports, in the newspapers of the time, we wouldn't know anything about her. And if we read the feminist accounts of this, we wouldn't know anything about her either. So I draw attention to that. Now, with the second case, this also brings up something I find quite interesting as a lawyer, because in the second case where Adela Pankhurst was advocating throwing rocks through the window of the shops in West Footscray, the High Court actually upheld the conviction. So what they did is what courts, I'm afraid, quite often do. Because they had to hold that Alice Suter and Jennie Baines were not guilty, because the legislation had been interpreted wrongly in the court below, they had to find Adela Pankhurst not guilty then too. With the other case, she was alone, and they said that the guilty verdict was correct. And Adela Pankhurst, her mother, Emmeline Pankhurst, who we know of as a feminist hero, had actually been writing to Billy Hughes and saying it would be a good idea if Adela Pankhurst was effectively imprisoned. She wasn't in favour or in support of her daughter Adele at all. And the reason that Adele was in Australia was because she actually was persona non grata with her mother. That is, Adela Pankhurst was recognised in England and in the United Kingdom when she spoke at rallies and so on, as all of them did, Emmeline, Christabel, Sylvia and Adela. She was recognised as a great orator, and she therefore was a challenge to Christabel, the older daughter. And Emmeline Pankhurst wanted Christabel to be the one who did, who took actions that were valued, that were valorised and were seen as really important. So she got rid of Adele and sent her out here to Australia. And when Adele was in Australia demonstrating as she did, the mother was not supportive of her. And I just want to speak shortly about Adela Pankhurst, because I think too that she may well have been misrepresented. You see, she was active in this way during the First World War. She married a trade unionist, and then she became a member of the Guild of Empire. And the Guild of Empire is seen as a very right-wing organisation. Therefore, Adela Pankhurst is written up as this radical who then went all the way to becoming a conservative. I think more needs to be done in terms of looking at her rationale for what she did and what she really was as a political activist, whether she really was conventional in her older age or whether there's been a misrepresentation. Because you see, if we look at women's organisations, quite often we are very unfair to them. I know that when I became involved in the women's movement in the 1970s, I was a member of the Women's Electoral Lobby. And the Women's Electoral Lobby did some really good work. But there was also a sort of a view that the Australian Federation of Business and Professional Women and the National Council of Women and the League of Women Voters were sort of passé, and we didn't bother about them. They were sort of back in the dark ages. Now, in fact, they weren't at all. And I know that in the struggle for equal pay, the Australian Federation of Business and Professional Women's were actually key to some of the achievements in that regard. The Women's Electoral Lobby was too, the National Council of Women was as well, and the League of Women's Voters was in there at one time too. The other issue I find interesting that needs to be reconsidered, in my opinion, is the issue of what happened in the 1950s. You see, the traditional view of women's activism and the women's movement is that it runs in waves, and that the vote was won and then somehow we all went home and did nothing. And particularly in the 1950s, after the Second World War, women all went home, did nothing, simply, I don't know, vegetated or were worried about putting food on the table for the husband. Well, it's not true, because I know from my work in this book, Wage Rage for Equal Pay, that the 1950s, in the 1950s, there was actually more activism and outspokenness and recording in the press of what women were doing in the argument for equal pay than there actually was in the 1960s, although we tend to think of the 1960s as a period of radicalism and the 1950s as a period when nothing happened. I also contend about this notion of waves, which I don't agree with at all. There are no waves in the women's movement, because if we say that there are waves, if we agree with this proposition, then what we're doing is, again, writing out of history all those women who existed and who were active and who were activist during the periods that we are saying are the slumps in the wave. And when do we say that the wave began and ended? The ridiculousness of this is that we have the first wave, so in fact we write out centuries of women's activism. We know that Christine de Pizan was writing in 1400 and something. We know that Mary Wollstonecraft was writing in the 18th century. We know that Mary Shelley was writing in the 19th century, and I'm just plucking those names out of the blue. It didn't all start in the 20th century, which the implication is, because that was when we won the vote. The activism for the vote and the activism of women, you can go back and you find it recorded again in the legal reports. Women were stopped from going to university because judges made decisions that women were not persons. And in 1860, there's a really famous case of Sophia Jex-Blake and 6 others. And what happened there was that Sophia Jex-Blake decided she wanted to be a medical practitioner. So she enrolled at Edinburgh University, and she was allowed to enrol. They let her in. Well, she got through the first year. A number of the male students didn't like it, and they brought a sheep or a goat, I've forgotten which, into the lecture theatre with a notice around its neck saying that this animal would do better than Sophia Jex-Blake. Well, the reality of it was that they were all upset because she was doing extremely well. And because she was enrolled, because she was studying medicine, because she was doing well, it attracted other women who decided they would enrol too. So 6 other women came forward to enrol. And it was at that stage that the University of Edinburgh decided that it was being invaded by women and that they had to do something to stop this. So they brought in the university visitor to look at it, and he said, well, I can't see that there's any problem, because the statute under which the university was brought into being said that any person with particular qualifications could enrol in the university. And he said, well, you've got these women wishing to enrol as persons in the university. But the university was not satisfied with that, and it went to the House of Lords. And in the House of Lords, the majority, there were 2 dissenting, said that the women were not entitled to go to university because women are not persons and therefore they aren't covered by this provision that says persons with the particular qualifications could go to university. And who was the junior counsel on that case? It was Richard Pankhurst, that is Emmeline Pankhurst's husband. And when you read the judgments, what the judges are saying in that case, one of the arguments they had was that women should not go to university because no women had applied. Well, that means that, first of all, Sophia Jex-Blake was written out because she had applied, and these 6 women had applied too. But they were saying, well, no women had applied before. So if you go on the basis that because no women have applied, no women can go, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. No women will be allowed to go because the first one that comes forward to enrol will be told, no, nobody's enrolled before you have. You can't do it. However, they were wrong. And Richard Pankhurst and his team brought out the fact that there was a professor at the University of Bologna in Italy right at that moment in any event. So clearly women elsewhere were going to university and enrolling and being accepted into that study. The other argument that was used was that if you're actually studying, it sends the blood to your brain, because in order for your brain to undertake study and to be operative in an activist way that's needed at university, then you need the blood up there. But women actually need the blood down there in the uterus in order to fulfill our God-given duty of bearing children. Well, we all see that that's a nonsense in and of itself, but it's also a contradiction of the reality of male procreation, because if a man's blood is up here in his brain, then it's not down there in his penis where it's necessary in order to engage in sexual intercourse to procreate. So their arguments simply don't have any validity, but these arguments continued to be made up until 1929. There are cases in Australia where women were prevented in Western Australia from going into legal practice. There was a case in South Australia where the woman was at last in legal practice and was prevented from going into another area of the practice of law because that particular act talked about persons. And in 1929, a case came up from Canada where the legislation that was relevant said that persons were entitled to be appointed to the Senate. That's their upper house. They've got the House of Commons as the lower house and the Senate as the upper. And these women said, we want to be appointed. And the Supreme Court said, no, you're not persons. And when the matter came to the Privy Council in England, London, and United Kingdom, as a part of the House of Lords, the man who was the president of the Privy Council clearly wanted to make his name. And unlike Alice Suter, Jennie, Baines, and Adela Pankhurst, this was not used against him as somehow wanting to be important in that regard. But anyway, they held that women were persons. And so it was not until 1929 that we actually gained a legitimacy in the law as human beings, as persons. And if we have this history, it's a history that infuses itself into our brains. And therefore, it's a part of the reason why the women police, for example, in the Queensland situation are not helpful, because they've got infused into their brains the patriarchal principles that that really somehow are embodied in all our brains and that we have to fight so hard to eliminate. I just want to conclude this by speaking a little about the struggle for equal pay, because if we look at the struggle for equal pay, then we see very clearly that this idea of the waves of feminism is wrong. At the end of the 19th century, there was a huge struggle for equal pay, just as there was a huge struggle against the exploitation of women through prostitution, against rape in marriage, and against women having to pay taxes when we weren't recognised as citizens. So there was a huge amount of activism at that time that was building on activism that had occurred before. It just doesn't come out of the blue. It comes out of this long history that we have of activism and of achievement and of being pushed out, but also managing to get back in or stay back in. And this is another area where I think there's misrepresentation of what the reality is. We had a system in Australia of centralised wage fixing, and it was an Australian invention. And what happened under that was that the unions would come into this tribunal and the employers would come into the tribunal, and they would argue in front of the tribunal as to what the wages should be, what the conditions of work should be, and so on. And that meant that the strong unions came in, like the CFMEU. I know that they're in disrepute at the moment, but they have been a very strong and powerful and valuable union in terms of fighting for real rights that are valuable for workers. So, and the mining industry union, they'd come in and they'd argue for the conditions and for the wages. And eventually an outcome would come out as a basic wage case or a national wage case, for example. Now, that meant that the less strong unions, which are the women's unions, like the shop assistants union and so on, they benefited from what the strong unions did under this centralised wage fixing system. And then that was how we got equal pay recognised for the first time. And the equal pay was recognised for the first time, not in 1969, which is written up as if that's when it was recognised. It was recognised much earlier than that in a case that was in around 1907, 1910. It was one where women were working in the fruit industry and some were doing picking and most were doing packing. If you were in picking, then you earn more money than if you were in packing, although ironically in the case it's recognised that packing is a more difficult job to do than picking. But what was decided there was that if women were doing the picking and that was a higher wage, then they had to get the higher wage, the same wage that the men did. That was an equal pay decision. The packing was still qualified as a lesser wage. And if the men were doing the packing, they would get the packing wage, not the higher wage that men got as pickers. So that's the first case that decided just on equal pay for equal work. And that's actually been ignored to a very large extent. And as I said, women in this field of equal pay worked all the way through, right through from the 1901 when the centralised wage fixing was introduced. They've been working before that, but I'm talking about the federal law here. And in 1969, again, there's a repeat of this idea, the equal pay for equal work. And then we have 1972 when the Whitlam government came in and Mary Gaudron represented the government in that case, and it was decided that we should go beyond equal pay for equal work to equal pay for work of equal value. And then in 1974 there was a case that said that the minimum wage that had been stopped from being extended to women and extended only to men should be extended to women too. Now, what happened then was that the minimum wage was abolished, which is often what happens when we have our achievements. But I want to come to the point about this because in the 1980s, very sadly, the Labor government, the Hawke Labor government and the ACTU, the Australian Council of Trade Unions, decided that centralised wage fixing was not the best system. And we went over to enterprise bargaining, which actually has put a real stopper on the whole struggle for equal pay. Because, as I said, when you have centralised wage fixing, it means that the strong unions go in and argue, and the argument that they put is an argument for the whole of the working sector. It's not just related to what they want to win for themselves. It operates on this collective idea that what comes out of the Commission is a standard that should be applied across the board, not meaning that everybody gets the same pay rate, but meaning that everybody will have the value of the increases that the argument has been put to the tribunal. Under enterprise bargaining, which is what we have now, the strong unions go to the employers and argue, their employers, the employers of their workers, they argue specifically for increases in pay, for increases in conditions for their own workers. And there is no flow-on effect. So that if you belong to a strong union, as men tend to do, then you're going to end up with higher pay rates and better conditions than if you belong to a weaker union, which most women do. You're going to end up with lesser. And if you look at what happens in Australia now with the Fair Work Commission, it makes a basic wage decision, but that basic wage decision generally applies to a majority of workers who are women. And therefore, that's an indicator that there is something seriously wrong with the system. If those who are mostly impacted by the Fair Work decision, which is about the lower levels of pay, are women. The final point I do want to make about this, about equal pay, is that what we need to be struggling for is for a return to centralised wage fixing. The current government is making moves in that regard to a certain extent by saying that enterprise bargaining can take place across sectors and so on. But in the 1990s, what we fought for was work skills value inquiries, because even if we get back centralised wage fixing, which in my opinion we must, under centralised wage fixing, women's wages were more equal to men's than they are at the present time. Scandinavia was and remains ahead, and Australia was second to Scandinavia in terms of women's wages. But if you just look at the current situation, you're ignoring the historical undervaluing of women's work. And the reason that the minimum wage didn't apply to women was because it was regarded that jobs women did had no skills at all. And because at that time, what was being looked at was skills. And if you're held not to have skills, you're not going to get a decent wage. With these work skills value inquiries, which were done in the 90s and the early part of this century, what you look at is traditional women's jobs like librarianship, like teaching, like preschool teaching, like childcare, like elder care, like the whole welfare industry, where women predominate. And what you do is look at the skills that are contained within that particular trade or profession. And then you look at that skill compared with a similar skill in a men's trade or profession and see what it's paid over there. I actually raised this issue in one of the cases in the Arbitration Commission, just to give you a final example of the problem that we confront. And I was arguing that you can't set the national wage without looking at equal pay and this historical undervaluing of women's work. And the head of the commission was Justice Madden, said, well, you know, what do you mean women are paid properly, etc. And I said, well, no, you need to look at a secretarial work. If you look at a secretary, what a secretary is doing is keyboard skills. Therefore, you have to compare what she's being paid for those keyboard skills in comparison with what a man is being paid for keyboard skills in computer industry. Right. And then I said, you also have to look at the fact that the secretaries have executive skills and compare them with executive skills that men are exercising. As soon as I said executive skills, Justice Madden's eyes lit up negatively, as if what I was saying was absolutely unacceptable. He could not accept that secretaries have executive skills. And why? Because he had a secretary, and he therefore undervalued the work that she was doing, and he could not comprehend or accept that the work that she was doing had that value. And you will often find this situation where women are doing a job, and if they weren't doing that job, the men that they're doing the job for would not be able to function properly. And you often find the case too that the woman will be doing a job and then she's asked to train up a man to take over some job, and he will be paid at a high level and she will continue doing the job but at a far lower level than he is. So I conclude this by saying, read Wage. I've actually got some really great stuff in there, I have to say myself, because of all the research I've done, and I've intercut it with chapters where I acknowledge a whole host of women who've been involved in this, which means I've left some women out because it's inevitable when you try to name names. But we need to always name the names, and name as many names as we can, not just the ones that are seen as important, not just the ones who end up in powerful positions, but the ones who are actually working away, like all of you, and who make a difference to where women are and how we're valued and what we stand for. And the very fact that what's happening at the present time is negative to women is an affirmation that the work that we've done and that the achievements that we've gained are working, and that we have made these real achievements. We often think we didn't succeed in something, and we always have to remember that there is something that we've succeeded in. When I was the Deputy Commissioner of the Law Reform Commission of Victoria, I went into a meeting once to achieve 10 things. I was reorganising the commission. I had to achieve 10 things. I came out of that meeting and I got on the phone to my sister and I said, I'm a failure. It's terrible. I haven't achieved. And she said, well, what actually happened? And I said, well, I went in with these 10 things and I came out with 8. I didn't get those extra 2. She said, look, put those extra 2 on another list when you go back into a meeting. Think of another 8, put those 2 together in your list of 10 and go back and argue them, and you will achieve them that way. And she was absolutely right. We should always remember that we do have achievements, even if we don't get 100% of what it is that we've been arguing for. And we have to value those achievements and recognise them, whilst at the same time recognising that in order to achieve 100%, we've simply got to put in 100% again, and it's again and again and again, and we're fighting the battles over and over and over, but it does make a difference, and everyone's life makes a difference. Everyone on this call is making a massive difference to the rights of women, and I'm proud to be here together with you, and I thank you for indulging me about my indulging in my legal how can I put it, analysis of those cases about the Pankhurst. I hadn't actually realised it was so legally orientated, but I did just want to make the point. Remember, never write anybody out of history and herstory, number one, and number two, remember that it's sometimes the patriarchal record that is the record that we need to see as the record of what we've done. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelynne. I have to tell you that I'm incredibly moved, and I think everyone who's listening is gobsmacked and in awe of your wonderful work and your amazing service to women's liberation for such a long time. And we just love that you're still here doing it with us. Thank you. Thank you so much. Congratulations on yet another book.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're a fiend. I remember when you were saying, oh, I had to cut it from 100,000 words to 60,000. I was like, yep, right. Yeah, that's you all over. You're brilliant. So,
oh, sorry, I'm saying it was 450,000 I had to cut to 150. Sorry to interrupt like this, yeah.
Oh, okay, well, that just makes the point even further, doesn't it? Sorry about the cat in the background. She's having the Zooms. So I would like to thank our amazing panel tonight, AAWAA, Karen Smith, thank you so much, Leah, Whiston and Sue Clarke from UP Queensland, and the Honourable Dr. Jocelynne A. Scutt, who is always such a treat to have along. I feel so honoured to have had this great discussion with you all. So I will stop the recording now, and we will get on to asking all those burning questions.